Okay, excellent. Now let's just see if that works. No. Okay, and ready. Hello and welcome back to the Build Your Purpose podcast, the podcast that will inspire you to fulfill your ambitions with lessons from those leading purposeful lives. This week, we're joined by a very, very special guest, one who's inspired me and thousands of others. Woman of the Year in 2023, an Everest summiter, the first woman to skydive Everest, and having completed a 1,000-kilometer expedition across Mongolia, our guest certainly lives a life full of purpose, which has led her to founding the exceptionally impactful NGO How Many Elephants, as well as the internationally celebrated World Female Ranger Week. Holly Budge, welcome to the Build Your Purpose podcast.
Hello, how are you, Tom?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule to talk to us. I know how busy you are with all of the things we've just spoken about there, and the various projects that you've got going on at the moment. So I really, really appreciate it. And we're going to dive into this conversation the same way we're going to start all episodes of the Build Your Purpose podcast, and that's with the intention of finding out what it is that's driving you by asking you, Holly Budge, what is your purpose?
And that is a great question, Tom, to kick off our conversation, and an area I'm very, very interested in. So I think, for me anyway, purpose is found at the intersection of what excites us. So for me, that's adventure, that's climbing mountains, that's jumping out of aeroplanes, and that is now patrolling on the front line with all female and mixed ranger teams in Africa, which we'll come on to. So it's about what excites us. It's about what we're good at. So for me, I think, my design skills, my creativity, my public speaking skills, they've all come into play massively in the line of work that I'm doing in nonprofit. And it's also about bringing value to others. So for me, that is my charity, How Many Elephants? It's my campaign, World Female Ranger Week. And my recent venture, taking people to the front line, is my travel company, Wildlife Positive Travel. So I think what is your purpose is the intersection of those three things. And it was only a few years ago, in my sort of late 30s, I'd say, that all those stars aligned and I was able to really find what my purpose is.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it is such a huge question, but you put it together incredibly eloquently. And I want to sort of go back to the first point that you made about what excites you and adventure. And the question that I think sort of is forefront in my mind when I look at your journey, and what was it that led you to the point where you were standing at the edge of a perfectly good aircraft with the intention to jump out of it? How did Holly get to that stage?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I try and only jump out of perfectly good aeroplanes, but lots of people don't jump out of aeroplanes at all. So yes, for me, I've always been adventurous, but when I went traveling to New Zealand and Australia, I did a bungee jump in Australia, and that just scared the hell out of me. And then I did a tandem skydive in New Zealand, and I just thought, I love this. This is what I want to do. And that was a real moment of, how do I now get employed as a skydiving camera woman? So big leap from doing a tandem to suddenly thinking I'm going to move halfway around the world and get a job as a skydiver. And I was really serious about it. I set it as a really big, audacious goal, and came back to the UK, carried on working in my role as a designer in London, saved up to go back to New Zealand, put myself through my skydiving course. And eventually I landed my dream job and was getting paid to jump out of aeroplanes 10, 11, 12 times a day, every day. And that just gave me this massive confidence and this self-belief that I could do whatever I put my mind to, or I could at least have a go. So I guess for me, Tom, every big audacious goal that I've ever set starts by setting an intention and then committing to that. But at the time, I didn't know that. I was in my early 20s. I was just going with what felt good and right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and I feel I have a lot of conversations with people who are on the precipice of wanting to do what you've gone and done, which is have a career in London or in the city in industry, but always having that seed in the back of their mind of, I'm built for more. I want to go and do X, Y, and Z. For you, it was going and getting qualified and then jumping out of more airplanes. How did that process come about for you in terms of having the confidence to leave a career in the city, a career in London at home, essentially, to then finding yourself in New Zealand with a completely different career, but one that you were passionate about? How did you navigate that process? I think a lot of people would love to hear about that, because I'm sure they want to emulate it as well.
Yeah, I mean, three things spring to mind when you ask me that. First thing is I've got an incredible family, very supportive family. So when I went home and said to my mum and dad, I'm going to move to New Zealand and get employed as a skydiver, they said, go for it. You know, not every parent I know out there would probably say go for it to that. So I felt very fortunate to have that support. As I said earlier as well, Tom, I didn't really overthink it. And that's what I now call hanging on to my 21-year-old mindset. And I think the older we get, we're all guilty of overthinking and procrastinating. But back then, I just thought, this feels right, and I'm going to go for it. I had some savings, which was really handy, because it took me a few months of training up to become a camera woman. So it was definitely that. I think that was a really defining factor, because a lot of people that wanted to do what I was doing were caught on the packing mat, packing parachutes. And the advice of the girl that I moved in with when I got there, an amazing English lady who was working as a camera woman at the time. And she was, I think, the second woman to have worked as a camera flyer in that role, second woman in Lake Taupo, New Zealand. So very male dominated industry. And she just said to me, Holly, if you can, go straight for the camera role. The minute you get the job on the packing mat, you won't leave the packing mat. And that's what happened to a lot of people. They thought, we'll become a skydiver, but we'll supplement that with packing. And I, totally understand that. But it was really hard for them to then get off the mat. So I just committed to, a few months of just training and going for it and putting everything into it. And I remember there was two guys there that were given 100 free skydives because they were family and friends of the owner. And so it was the race was on, because I was funding myself, and we had to buy a parachute, and it was kind of there was a fair investment initially to getting into this, and but they had it all given to them on a plate, and they became fantastic free flyers. So they were flying on their head, sit flying, doing all this cool stuff, whilst I was just chipping away at learning how to film tandems, jump out the plane with them in frame, keep them in frame the whole jump. And I got the job. And my boss at that time is one of my best friends to this day. And he was like, it didn't matter that you're a woman or a man, you worked hard, you were ready to go before them. But it was a real shock to them when they were like, what do you mean she's got the job? So I guess being focused, working hard, and just eye on the prize. What a cool job. That I wanted that job, and so I went for it.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and how you talk about the hard work and the perseverance, because when you set a goal, there's often not one route of getting to the end point, and there's so many things that get thrown at you, like you say, the financial challenges, the industry challenges, whether it's bias within your boss or bias within the communities that you're in. Overcoming those is such an important part of actually achieving your goals. But I want to go back to the point you made about always setting big, ambitious goals. Has that been something that you think is intrinsic within you, or is that something that you've learned to do along the way? I'm interested in how that started for you, and maybe if you feel free to share, what your first goal was that you set, and what the process has been like, snowballing that to now setting up NGOs and becoming an adventurer.
To be honest, like Tom, I don't remember sort of really. I mean, I was really confident child, and growing up. I think again I had massive support around me, pushing me to do things I wanted to do, but not pushy parents. But they totally supported. I did a lot of sports and was competitive in a lot of that. But it wasn't till I really landed that job in New Zealand that I thought, actually, okay, I've got this under my belt. Then I heard quite a few years later, I heard about becoming an expedition, a world first expedition, skydiving Everest. And I just thought, that has got my name written all over it. I'm going to go for that. And I rang up the organizer, and there were no other women signed up. So I just thought, this is me. This is my hook for getting sponsors to invest in me. I'll become the first woman to skydive Everest. And that's never easy, as I'm sure you know yourself. It gets a bit easier, but I wouldn't say it's ever easy as getting sponsors and getting people to buy into you and your passion and your vision. But I did that. He said, the organizer said it will be £24,000. Are you on board? And I went, yep, count me on board. Didn't have £24,000 there, but that didn't matter. Set me that bar, set me that big goal. And then, I work towards finding people to invest in me, and I managed to do that. So when I achieved that goal, I just thought, okay, I'm on a roll here. And then I just kept going after that, setting big audacious goals. And that's what I've tried to. I'm 45 now, and so we're nearly a quarter of a century back, so I guess I've got experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I completely agree with you that gathering sponsorship is always such a difficult aspect of any expedition. I was reading Steve Backshall's book Expedition, and I think page 2 he talked about how any expedition is the hardest part is always getting to the start point. And I just thought, yeah, you're exactly right. And it was comforting to know that someone like him is also hitting the same barriers as we are. But I want to go to the talk about the challenges and whether it's setting a goal to become the skydiving instructor, and then going completely out there and saying I'm going to be the first woman to skydive from the heights of Everest, which is unbelievable. How important is it, do you think, for everyone in their own way? It doesn't have to be jumping out of a plane in the heights of Everest, but how important is it for everyone day to day to challenge themselves as you do?
I think it's so important. I think setting big audacious goals just transforms everyday life. And suddenly, suddenly you've got a big goal, and you've got a clear direction that you're working towards. And I think that really shifts life from going through the motions and being ordinary through to being extraordinary. And suddenly there's a magic in the air, and there's something really driving you forward. So for me, I think it's really important to have those big goals.
Yeah,
and it's
definitely.
I mean, I'm very goal orientated, like with fitness, with my non-profit, everything. I've got to know what I'm working towards. I can't be one of those people that, just sort of plods along. It's got to be towards something. And I think you're probably quite similar to that as well, Tom.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm definitely a goal orientated person. I have to have something that I'm working towards. And a quote that really stuck with me when I was starting out with trying to get expeditions and stuff off the ground was when I listened to a talk that Arnold Schwarzenegger did, and he said, "You can have the best ship or airplane in the world, but if you haven't got a destination, then you'll just float around or fly around without any kind of without any trajectory." So yeah, having that end point is so important, and then working back from then. That, as you said, when you've achieved one, you have that confidence boost to go and achieve the next one, and I think that's such a crucial thing that I think everyone should be doing in their day-to-day lives of setting goals and then trying to achieve them as well. And I'm interested in exploring the next goal that you went on to go and do, which is arguably the biggest goal that's out there, which is standing at the highest point on Earth at the summit of Mount Everest. How did you go from, what was the trajectory and the journey like from achieving your ambition of becoming the skydiving instructor and camera woman to then becoming an Everest summiter? What was the process like of realizing that's what you wanted to do, setting that goal, and then eventually achieving it too?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Tom, when I first laid eyes on Mount Everest, when I skydived it, it was just a magical sight. Have you seen Everest?
I've never been to Nepal. No, it's on the list, but I have to keep that rather quiet.
You need to get yourself to Nepal. It's a magical place, and actually, there's a mountain next to it called Ama Dablam, which is like the mountain in the Paramount film logo, and that dominates the skyline. It's the most beautiful mountain, which I've climbed as well. More technical. Everest isn't a technical mountain, but I thought Ama Dablam, I was like, wow, is that Everest? And Everest is just kind of poking out at the end of the valley, and it's, you know, until you get right up to it, it's you know, it's slightly obscured the vision. But when I saw it, I was just like, wow, that is magic. And I thought one day I'm going to be back to climb to the summit, but I don't know anything about mountaineering. But none of that mattered, because then I made Everest a 5-year goal, and I just climbed as many mountains as I could, eventually leading up to 8,000 meter peaks in the Himalayas, and just got my confidence up. So I guess turning up to climb Everest, like I said, it's not a technical mountain. It's essentially a very long walk at high altitude. It's the altitude that makes it difficult, and the length of time it takes to acclimatize. So I was on the mountain 47 days above 5,000 meters. So to put that in perspective, you know, your mountain in Kyrgyzstan, what was that, 6,000?
So with the mountain itself was 7,001, but due to the weather was just absolutely brutal. So we just got to 6,135. We got to.
Yeah. So my first Himalayan mountain was Mira Peak, which is 6,500 meters. And I just couldn't wrap my head around that base camp of Everest is 5,000 meters. And that's when you arrive there, because I climbed from the north side, because there's way few climbers on the north, wanted to avoid those queues. But you actually drive to base camp. So you do a lot of your initial acclimatization, you know, on the road, I drove from Lhasa to Everest base camp over the space of, I think, 4 days. And when you arrive to base camp, you feel awful. You know, it's really tough putting your tent up and just doing basic things. But as time goes on, base camp becomes your safe place. And that becomes, you know, a place that's just full of oxygen. When you start going higher up on the mountain, you get back to base camp, you're like, yeah, I feel great now. So amazing, incredible how the body can acclimatize. But then, as we know, when you get up into the death zone, 8,000 meters, nobody's acclimatizing to that. So it's tough. You're deteriorating for 47 days. You know, your strength, your mind and body, you know, it's a long period of time to be 5,000 meters or above. But I felt very, what's the word? I felt prepared. I'd done a lot of mountaineering before I got there. I met people on Everest that had never put on a pair of crampons before. They'd never stepped foot on snow before. I met people on Everest that were on supplemental oxygen at base camp, going for the summit. And it's like, ooh, what are you guys doing here? It's a crazy place to be, Tom. It's a circus, you know, and that's the north side. I mean, every south side's like Glastonbury, I've heard, but
yeah,
you know,
I've heard similar I heard similar with the north side. So friend of mine was trying to lead on the north side this year, but then because of visa issues and them not opening up, they then had to switch to the south side. And they said it was like going from, you know, a quiet kind of base camp with, you know, a few people in it to suddenly you're in, like at a festival where there's just stuff everywhere.
Which is terrifying, I think.
Yeah, which adds so much.
Festival.
And it adds so much more danger because you've got, as you say, the queues and people that aren't equipped. And I want to pick up on the dangers and the fears that come with mountaineering. Obviously, I've been on Lenin in Kyrgyzstan this year, and there was a lot of avalanches and the crevasse fields were really tricky this year, and the weather was just brutal. So you're in this sort of heightened state I was there for 3.5 weeks. So I was on the hill for 20 days or so. So nothing like yours on Everest, but similar experience of being in this kind of heightened state all the time. And I'm interested in how you dealt with those fears and those dangers to achieve your goal, because I think it's representative, clearly not as life or death as it is on a mountain. But if someone's trying to take a leap to start their own business or start their own NGO or do something that's in line with their purpose, there's fear, there's trepidation about it. You've obviously been at the absolute extreme on Everest, a high altitude, dangerous mountain. How did you cope with the fears, the trepidation to eventually achieve your goal?
Yeah, so first off, I'll set the scene by saying I climbed Everest as a 2-person team, which is rare. Most commercial teams are much bigger. So there's kind of pros and cons of climbing with just 2 of you. biggest pro being, you can make decisions quickly and you're agile and you can, like we got caught in a queue and then made a decision to spend an extra 7 hours at the high camp before the summit, to let the two teams ahead of us go first. So if that had been a big commercial group, you've got lots of competing personalities and pressures. So just having two of you definitely made life more simple, but also, if anything happened to your climbing partner, then, it's a difficult place to be. Also, I want to say, Tom, with Everest, you're moving up the fixed lines. So I've done similar climbs to, I'm sure, what you were experiencing on Lennon Peak in Kyrgyzstan. So I've did a first ascent in Mongolia, is the climb I'm thinking of right now. And that's where, you're all roped together, moving across highly crevassed, glaciers, etc. And that's got a very different feel to it than climbing up a mountain like Everest. So Everest, even on the north side, it's a well-trodden path, and you are moving up the fixed lines. So you kind of don't really have that fear as much as you'd have felt in Kyrgyzstan of, when you're sort of lying on your front, poking in your trekking poles to see if you're moving over a crevasse or not, so different mindset right there, but yeah, I think for me, climbing as a two-person team was great. I really loved that, and we got rewarded with half an hour on the summit to ourselves. And very few people sit on the summit of Everest to themselves. Like quite often there's a queue. Even on the north side there's queues, and then you have a summit photo. Sometimes the Sherpas have told me that they have to hide behind their clients because they're not conscious for a photo. It is a crazy mountain. In all the mountains I've climbed, I've never stepped over a dead body aside from on Everest. And I saw 9 bodies on the way up to the summit. And I spoke to a Sherpa when we got back down who was doing an independent study, of how many bodies were on the side of the north side. And he said he'd counted 26 on the route that I had gone. So, I mean, that's a lot of people, isn't it, to be stepping over? I only had to step over a few because they were right on the path. But that really brought it home to me how fine that line is between life and death when you are up at these high altitudes. So I have a motto: don't get lucky, get prepared. Yep. And I couldn't imagine turning up underprepared or not prepared at all. There's nothing heroic about that. And then becoming a statistic lying on the side of Everest for an eternity, and in a lot of cases taking a Sherpa or two with you. So for me, get the skills, learn the skills, get good at it, turn up mentally fit, physically fit, and be ready to go.
Do the prep work essentially. Yeah, exactly. I think you're completely spot on with it. And going into any situation, whether it's as you're launching your own business or climbing a mountain, you have to be prepared. And I had a similar experience with you in Kyrgyzstan, where people were not prepared for what we were about to go and do, and people clearly hadn't done the research, because when we were going through the crevasse field and up through, because it's a similar climb to the south side of Everest a little bit, obviously not quite as brutal in terms of the length, but you leave base camp and you go through an icefall, which is the Kumu icefall representative on Everest. We go through that, and then you through the crevasse fields and up to Camp 2, and people kind of going, wow, I didn't know this was here. And you think, well, have you not watched any of the vlogs? Or because you just got to type it into YouTube and you can have hours of it. And people just weren't prepared. So I think the lesson there from both of our experiences on the mountains, for anyone, whatever their challenge and their goal is do your prep work first, because that's the key to success, or at least the key to mitigating failure. I'm interested in obviously the brutality on Everest, and we very sadly had a situation on the mountain in Kyrgyzstan this year where a team 2 days behind us got caught in an avalanche, and one of them very sadly passed away. That was a very interesting and difficult headspace for, I think, a lot of people, because suddenly, as you say, it brought home where you are and what you're doing, and it's not a game. How did you deal with that, as you say, that realization as you're stepping over a dead climber. How did you do? Because that's an extreme situation that not many people have been in.
Yeah.
What was it that got you through that? And what was your mindset to be able to just observe it, deal with it, and then carry on, continue to your goal?
Yeah, and I get asked that a lot when I'm giving talks. That's a question that comes up a lot is, well, when you saw the first dead body, why didn't you turn around and go back down? Because, surely you realize that could be you lying there. And it's like, well, yes, but equally that wasn't the first time that I'd become aware there were going to be bodies on Everest, because I'd done my homework, done the preparation. And also you've got to have ability, and you've got to have confidence in your own abilities, and just because, like you say, driving up the M1 motorway, because you see a car crash and, unfortunately maybe someone's died in that doesn't mean you're never going to get in a car again and drive again. It's the same on the mountain. Just because you're stepping over the dead doesn't mean that you're not going to carry on if you've got those confidence in your own abilities. So for me, yes, it was profound. I wasn't prepared for how much it would affect me and play on my mind. That that body was just, people think, oh, they chose to go there, they're in sort of, they made that decision, so we're going to leave them there. When you actually see those bodies on Everest, it's pretty lonely, and some of them are in pretty precarious places, and they're just getting battered by the winds and the weather, and you just think I'm not sure how peaceful it is to be left here for an eternity. But on the flip side of that, it costs so much money for the Sherpas to do recovery missions and bring these bodies back down. Then you think, there's an argument there as well for sending up a team of strong men to bring down a dead person. So, yes, it had an effect on me. It wasn't nice, but it was also not unexpected. I knew that was coming, and also I'd put the time in beforehand, so I knew I felt all right. I knew I felt strong, so I kept pushing on. But one thing, Tom, is I would have no problem turning around. If I wasn't feeling it, or I was feeling like the altitude was getting to me or whatever, I'll be like, I'm coming back another day. This mountain is not going anywhere. We saw some pretty bad things, like people, living things, not the dead, the living, and people on their own coming down those ropes, and they look like they're completely drunk. They can't hold themselves up. They're falling all over the place, keep falling over, and they're on their own. And you just think, God, really? Like, is this worth it? Is it worth ticking that box? It's an interesting place. And then you see the semi-conscious that have got a Sherpa each side of them, rope to them, and they're literally being dragged up, dragged back. Is that adventurous? Is that heroic to say I've been on the summit of Everest, but I wasn't conscious, I don't remember it, but I've got a photo to prove it? I mean, you're like me, Tom. You're coming at this from an adventurer background, from an adventurer mindset, not someone that's never stepped foot on a mountain before trying to tick a box. And then you got to think as well, if those Sherpas lose their lives, in most, if not all cases, their families don't have backup. They're the breadwinners. So you're just taking the breadwinner out of a family so that you can tick that box. And it goes on.
It's not worth it at all.
The ripple effect goes on and on and on.
I'm with you on that as well. The risk versus reward. We saw a team that pushed through a weather window that we decided not to push through. And similar to you, we saw some pretty horrific living spectacles, but coming down with exceptional, very extreme frostbitten injuries on face, hands, feet, that kind of stuff. And exactly the same conversation you had was, well, was it worth that? Is it worth that risk versus reward? And it's about having that prep work, I think, as you said, to be able to understand what you're going into, but then having the confidence in yourself to be able to say, actually, this is not worth it. I'll come back, and the mountain's not going anywhere. I'm gonna come back. And I'm interested in your
common sense, though, isn't it, Tom? It's common sense in a lot of cases. Like one guy I saw on Everest, he was crawling into advanced base camp, 6,500 meters, couldn't even carry his own bag. he's up at 8,000 meters 2, 3, 4 days later, comes back snowblind, severe frostbite. It's like, well, what were you thinking was going to happen? That you were going to get better if you kept going higher, you know?
Yes.
So it's
As you
crazy.
said, it's a crazy place, and people do crazy things that you and I would look at it and go, well, what are you doing? But people kind of lose sense of all sense of propriety, I think, and just kind of go to this sort of weird heightened state of, I'll be all right, I'll just keep pushing. And as you say, and they end up endangering themselves and the people around them. And I'm interested where you said, you have no problem in turning back. And I'm interested in your relationship with failure, for want of a better, that all encompassing phrase of failure, because you've mentioned a few times how confident you are in your own abilities, and you reinforce that with preparation work, but you've always been a confident individual willing to set big, ambitious goals.
Yeah.
Within that process, what's your relationship like with dealing with the fear of failure, if you have a fear of failure, and then if and when you've experienced failure, how you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, no one wants to fail, no one sets out to fail. I don't think. I've never met anyone that's, what's your goal? To fail at this. But, failure it stings at the time. It sucks. But, you're still alive. You can still go back and do it another day. So I think, nobody likes failure, but, I think you've got to learn from your failures. But I read the other day and I thought that was a really interesting take as well. On the flip side is, and this isn't mountaineering per se, this is just life and adventures, is failure can become a habit. And that was in Lewis Pugh's 21 Yaks and a Speedo, which I've just finished reading, which I know it's 10 years old, but brilliant book. But I thought that's an interesting take as well, because I've had a couple of failures in the last year or so. And you do think that, you just start to think, actually, did I quit too early on that? Could I have pushed through that? And I don't know, like you definitely got to assess each and every failure, but I think you can learn from failure. But you can maybe sometimes get used to thinking, actually, I'm, this is too hard, or I can't do it. And those negative voices creep in. And on the mountain, I don't know about you, but I don't know, in Kyrgyzstan, if you had experiences of those sort of those voices creeping in, of you questioning your abilities. Am I good enough to be here? If you get behind the group a bit, am I ever going to catch them up, or am I going to get left here? Am I going to die here? And before you know it, those voices can come thick and fast.
Yeah.
And I actually have a technique I use in mountaineering, but also in running and hiking. It's brilliant. It's so easy. I call it the mirror step. And you just, when I was on Barunsi, I was climbing 7,000 meter peak in the Himalayas, and I left the high camp last with a Sherpa, and the whole rest of the group were ahead of me. And I got to the summit 2 hours before any of them, and I didn't even know I'd passed them. And I'll tell you why. It was really late when we left high camp. Nothing to see. It's pitch dark. It's freezing cold, and I just slotted in behind the Sherpa. When he moved his foot, I moved my foot. When he moved his foot, I moved my foot. As simple as that. And what it did is it kept me really focused, and it kept me very quiet in my mind, and it was quite meditative. Like all I had to focus on was his feet and moving with him. And the Sherpas are fantastic at this, because they don't stop, start, stop, start. They get a rhythm. It's slow, and they just keep going. And that's really conscious. I've chatted to a lot of the Sherpas about this, and they don't like the stop, start, stop, start. No. That's quite a Western thing. Like race along a bit, stop, race along a bit, stop. And so I just followed him all the way up to the summit. And then I started doing that on every mountain. I'd slot in behind climbing partner or the Sherpas or whoever it was that I was climbing with. Now I'm a little less selfish about that and rotate around. But if you're out running, if you're out hiking, you're just feeling a bit tired, or your mind's just drifting all over the show, just start following people's feet in front of you. Like if you're out running, just slot in behind someone.
Mm.
And it's kind of like the drafting on the bikes, you know, but for walking and running and climbing. And it just keeps that mind quiet. And that for me has been a real like skill to have in my toolbox, if you like.
Yeah, leaning on others, and you've mentioned other people a couple of times in the conversation. Right at the beginning, you had incredibly supportive parents that when you came to them with these ambitious goals, and then talking about now, obviously, with climbing partners and forming these important relationships. And go back to a conversation I had with Neil Lawton on episode 1, talking about how important it is to have the right people around you on expeditions, but also just in life too. Is that a feeling that you would definitely support, that the people around you are crucial to success?
Well, and that was really long-winded, my answer, because that brings me around to my recent failure of the Silk Road mountain race, 1,900 kilometer, mostly above 3,500, 4,000 meters, so high altitude, solo, self-supported, and you have to do it in under 14 days. So you're averaging 140 kilometers a day on a gravel bike, on a mountain bike, and you're finding your own water, food, everything, and it's brutal. But this was the first adventure I've done where I'm all on my own, and I didn't have that momentum, if you like, when I was really feeling it and struggling, and you're on the bike for like 16, 17 hours and everything's hurting, and you're thinking, I'm only on day 1, I got another 13 days of this, and it becomes a mindset thing. But then I got sick. I drank some water that I'd sterilized, obviously hadn't done it well enough, got really sick, and I pulled out of the race. And I thought, I'll come back, there's no point in me pushing through this race, because I'd got behind. They have a snail which moves on the screen, you know, the digital snail, 5 kilometers an hour. And that just goes the whole 14 days. So if you get behind the snail, you're not going to make the finish line in time. And there were people on that race that had probably got way sicker than me, were way behind the snail, but were like, hey, we're pushing on. We're here now. We've trained hard to be here, and we're just going to go for the adventure. But I didn't work like that. The minute I got sick, I was like, no, I'm way behind the snail now, because I had to spend a night in a yurt. I was in the middle of nowhere, you know, and I just thought, no, I'm going to come back. I'm coming back next year. I'll come back the year after, and I'm going to try this again, because I didn't see that point in pushing and pushing and pushing, knowing I wasn't even going to make the cutoff. So, you know, horses for courses, but for me, I saw that as a bit of a failing. I'd trained for best part of a year for that. I was training 24 hours a week, which is part-time job. So when I'd only done 2 days into the 14 days, I was like, this wasn't the plan, but I can go back and do it another time. You know, I don't need to hurt myself, as it were, anymore, if I just know I'm not gonna meet the finish line, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And that knowledge of knowing when to stop, I think is crucial, because you say, whether it's in mountaineering or in other contexts, that ability to put the brakes on and say, you know, yes, I'm pushing hard. I'm obviously going to be pushing hard. I'm doing something that's physically strenuous, but knowing when to stop. You know, don't push too hard. Don't push your luck. I think is such an important lesson that I've learned, certainly on the mountain, was, you know, you're gonna have to push hard, but don't push too much, because it'll bite. And if it happens, it's catastrophic. And that's a lesson for life, I think.
Definitely. And just to put that in perspective as well, Tom, I think, you know, we all compare ourselves, and you look at what other people are doing, and the level of endurance in these races is gone through the roof. So the winner last year of the Silk Road mountain race, he came in 6.5 days. 1,900 kilometers, 6.5 days. He rode the first 450 kilometers without stopping. It's like, whoa.
Wow. Yeah,
I mean,
levels of
superhuman endurance, and they're like sleeping an hour in every 24 hours, you know, and it's next level. Like,
yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's almost sort of torturous levels of sleep deprivation and physical endurance. So yeah, I suppose it's the most important competition is always with yourself rather than with the people around you. I think is such an important part of any journey that you're on. And yeah, when you're on the mountain, you and I have seen with how the Sherpas move, so fluid, so strong. You know, you're never going to be able to get to the same level that they're at. So you just got to hang on to their coattails and compete with yourself and just try and better what you did the day before, because you're never going to reach that level. So
and find ways of doing things that work for you. You know, like I know when I'm at high altitude, I get anxious. You know, I'm just, I don't know why, but it just makes me, I just need to know where everything is. So I need to know in my bag, in a heartbeat, whatever I'm looking for, I know exactly where it is. And I think same with the tent, everything's got to be organized. And if it's not, I feel that puts me right on edge, but also those negative voices, I think. And when I was in Kyrgyzstan doing the Silk Road, you know, when I hit those low moments before I got sick, there wasn't anyone there like helping me get through that. And I found that next level difficult in just trying to motivate yourself all the time. You know, it was just like, oh, this sucks. Everything hurts and it's boiling hot and now it's freezing cold and this and that. And, blah, blah, blah. And you just, you know, I think doing it with someone sort of maybe would have been a better way into ultra cycling endurance races than just going in at the deep end and trying to do it all at once, you know?
Yeah, and exactly right. Having people around you is so important, because when you're having a bit of a moment, you know, maybe you just haven't slept well or you're not feeling great, they hopefully will be able to pick you up, and then vice versa. And the people that you meet on these expeditions and in these environments are always brilliant people to be around anyway. You're always going to have a great time with them, because you're all have a synergy in terms of you're both purposeful people. Your whole team is there for a reason, because it takes, you know, a certain kind of someone to want to go to those environments. You say you're boiling hot, then you're freezing cold, then you're really hungry, then you're really tired. It takes a certain type of person to want to put themselves into those environments. So you do meet amazing people. And speaking of amazing people, I want to move on to World Female Ranger Week and the individuals that you must meet in that sphere. If you could just, you know, tell us a little bit about the intention, the purpose behind setting up World Female Ranger Week, and then also how inspirational the stories must be from the front line that you connect with.
Yeah, so just a quick bit of background on that. I set up my UK registered charity, How Many Elephants, which came about 10 years ago when I was studying for a master's in sustainable design. And I was studying a material called vegetable ivory, which is a nut from a palm tree from South America, which looks almost identical in color and texture to elephant ivory. And that's what got me researching the African elephant crisis. And I was just so shocked by reading that 96 elephants were being poached each day for their ivory that I wanted to use my design skills to come up with an awareness raising campaign that's non-gruesome, non-gory, non-political. So 10 years on, my exhibition showcases 35,000 elephants. It travels around the world, and it's allowed me to connect with many different types of audiences because I'm just visualizing the data. So then that led me to then hear about this incredible band of women in South Africa called the Black Mambas. And they're Africa's, possibly the world's first all-female anti-poaching team. And I learned about them shortly after their inception in 2013. And I just thought, you know, I've got to go out there. I've got to meet these women. So I was already studying the African elephant crisis, and then heard about these ladies. I've spent much time on the front line with them and other teams across Africa. And for me, that was just a whole different type of adventure. You know, it's scary, scary stuff when you're in ambushes. You know, I'm unarmed. A lot of them are armed. I'm the only white person, generally speaking, out there. So I stand out like a beacon in the bush, and they try and, you know, some of them got me to wear their uniforms and stuff to try and blend me in a little bit better, but they were like short sleeves, so I was still I'm still here. But you know, on a serious note, this isn't adventure. This is their real world everyday job, and it's scary and it's challenging. But for me, it really ticked that box of, you know, this makes climbing Everest look like child's play, is what I've been quoted saying before. So then I started thinking, how can I help these women? How can I elevate their voices? So rewind to when I became the first woman to skydive Everest. The thing that caught me the most by surprise was the level of media attention. So I was on, CNN, CBS, BBC Breakfast, The Red Sofa, on the front page of the Metro. All these massive global platforms picked up that story, and that got me thinking all the way back then, how can I harness the power of the global media for a greater good than me jumping out of an aeroplane or me climbing a mountain? So fast forward that 15 years, I launched World Female Ranger Day, which is now a week. And last year we got 500 million views around this week. And I'm working with around 4,500 female rangers across 18 African countries and around 5,500 worldwide. And these women just inspire me. They humble me every single day. And the hardships, the adversities they've overcome to get to where they are now is, it's humbling. It's incredible. So just to finish on that point, Tom, like we now see the ripple out effect 10 years on from employing women from local communities. The guy that was the warden in Greater Kruger, Baluli at the time, he said they were losing elephants and rhinos at such a rate 10, 12 years ago that they just didn't know what to do. And that's when he came up with the idea that we go into the local communities and invite the women to come forward and try out as rangers. So they went through a very rigorous training process, and the black mambas are unarmed. They just have pepper spray and handcuffs, and they walk a different patrol day and night to disrupt the landscape. But since the inception of the Mambas, other all-female teams have popped up. So Akashinga in Zimbabwe, they are fully armed. They have AK-47s, and they are the last line of defense. There's no armed patrol behind them. So when I'm out patrolling with them, when we're ambushing, or when we're sitting in pitch darkness all night waiting for poachers' torchlights, we're moving in. And that's pretty scary, So the ripple out effect of employing these women is women put, according to UN research, up to 80% of their wages back into their family. So these women, they're now, landowners, they're the breadwinners, they've built houses, their kids are in school. Some of these women have got degrees or masters, higher education, and they've got access to healthcare. And that ripples through not only their families, but through the communities and to the world at large, because the female rangers that I'm working with just are incredible role models to women around the world. So it's a really exciting space to be in. So World Female Ranger Week is a platform to celebrate these women and amplify their voices in the global media. And we raise lots of money, lots of awareness. I have a brilliant expression that you'll love, is conservation without funding is just conversation. And feel free to quote me on that one, Tom.
Yeah, definitely. I like that. It's a good one. It's a really good one.
It is a good one. And it's so true. There's a lot of chat out there, but ultimately, you need the funding as well to make these conservation wills go around. So that's
definitely. And I think with the work I do at David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, so much of it is amplifying the stories from the front line and communicating in as an effective way and as an amplified way as you can what's happening on the front line. Because as you say, conservation isn't about clipboards and taking samples and researching. So much of certainly large mammal conservation in Africa is around militarization and around ensuring that we can have the long-term plans in place to put in habitat restoration programs, community engagement programs, sustainable livelihood programs to ensure that there's a future where the wildlife can exist, but at the rate that they're being slaughtered, particularly elephant and rhino, there's no point in thinking that for even 5 years ahead, because there won't be any left or there won't be sustainable populations. So supporting the work that certainly you're doing with World Female Ranger Week is so important, I think, because as you say, they're the front line of defense, and if they're not resourced effectively, there really is going to be a world where we don't have elephants and rhino, which is which in my opinion can't happen. And I think people are shocked to hear that, and they think that maybe we're being over dramatic as conservationists when we talk about it, but we're not. And obviously you've been there, you've been on the front line, and you've experienced what they're experiencing day to day. And just I'm interested in the kind of the hardships that they face, and then what you may have learned from how they deal with those hardships, because you say you've been in environments where on mountains people do lose their lives, but certainly in conservation now, certainly militarized conservation, we're losing rangers at an alarming rate, and they're facing real danger and real hardship. What have you seen and observed about how they deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I'm now working with 5,500 women around the world, and even though these women are on opposite sides of the planet, in many cases they're facing very similar challenges, and some of those challenges might include the lack of equipment or ill-fitting equipment. When the Black Mambas were first launched 10 years ago, no one had even considered to put a sports bra, for example, in as part of a female ranger's uniform, and these women are patrolling up to 20 kilometers a day. So something as simple as that was really causing some of them, massive shoulder, back pains. So that's now more of a standard part of the uniform. Same with personal hygiene products, with them being out in the bush for many days at a time. In lots of cases, this was also, a real problem. So the equipment side of things is one thing. Security in the workplace is another thing. A lot of the male rangers weren't supportive of women coming into their workspace as rangers. So mixed ranger teams, I think there's definitely been some hurdles in many of those teams integrating women into the team. But having said that, I've also spent time with say like the Mara Elephant Project in Kenya, who are a fabulous example of a mixed team. Their leader is a 21-year-old girl from, a Kenyan lady. She flew through ranger training at 19. She was leading the team by the age of 21. But just as an example of a sacrifice she's had to make, when I was chatting to her, she's such an incredible woman. And when I was chatting to her, I said, this is fantastic that you've been so successful coming through the ranger ranks. And she said, yeah, no, it's amazing. And I'm now the breadwinner. But when I go home 1 week in every month, my 1-year-old daughter doesn't know that I'm mummy. And she said that really pulls at your heartstrings. And then she said to me, but even if I wanted to go home, that option is no longer available to me because I'm the breadwinner. So I'm not able to go home and be a full-time mum anymore. Wow. So, these are all sort of like sacrifices that these women have made. And then another one that keeps coming up and up and up is social stigma. So their families the communities initially may have been against women working in these roles, thinking it was too dangerous, not suitable, sleeping out in the bush with a man that you're not related to or not married to. All these cultural norms are being broken down. So I think, these women are absolutely paving the way for other women to stand at the forefront of conservation. But in terms of strength of mind, I've never met ladies as strong as them. They said to me, literally, I've probably interviewed over 150 female rangers on the ground, and they just said, we just didn't have anything to lose. And, here's an example. This is just an example, but it's an example one of the female ranger leaders gave me, is that in the special forces, 38 men will turn up, 3 will finish. With these women, 38 turned up and 35 would finish. And I think that just blew everyone's mind, the strength or the mental strength and endurance of these women. And they're not getting trained differently to the men either. They go through the same training process. So I think it's blown everyone. I think everyone's been surprised at the strength.
Yeah, that's unbelievable to say. Yeah, 38 to 35 is a hugely successful ratio, and that's blown my mind.
That is an illustrative example, but it gives you a sense of a lot of these ladies were finishing the training.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast is the Build Your Purpose podcast, and I think they're certainly women and people that are showing how strong a purpose is and how strong you can be in pursuing your purpose in the harshest of conditions, not only say physically, but the social stigma, the interactions they're having with colleagues, etc. It's such a difficult space, and they're pioneering it, and so are you. So it's such an extraordinary initiative that you've created, and I think it's only one that should be amplified further. So well, congratulations on it, and obviously World Female Ranger Week was a couple of weeks ago now, so come back round again. So look out for it on social, look out for it on socials, and that brings us to the final kind of closing quick fire questions, and these are just around looking to get some tangible tips from you and where to look for further inspiration, further purpose building. And the first one is a book that you think should be on everyone's bookshelf.
Well, I think for me that book is the one I've just read. I've loved it. Is Lewis Pugh, 21 Yaks and a Speedo. There's some really good stuff in this book. So really good read. I'm not the fastest reader, but I've read through this book in just a few days, and I've loved every minute of it. And it's nice big type.
Yeah, it always helps. Perfect. And we spoke earlier around your relationship with failure and incidences that you've experienced recently, as you say, in Kyrgyzstan. But has there been a time in your journey from way back in the beginning to where you are now, where failing has led then to success?
This is meant to be quick fire. Let's answer that one quickly. I have a fear of fast moving water, and I got stuck under a raft in New Zealand going down the highest commercially rafted waterfall, 7 meters, and I popped up and the raft was there, so I had to find this little air pocket, and I'm asthmatic, and I just couldn't breathe, and it was terrifying. So I decided 4 years ago to try and overcome that. And so the upside of that was completing the coast to coast from one side of New Zealand to the other, 243 kilometers by kayak, bike and running. And I had to learn to kayak especially for this. And I kayaked successfully 70 kilometers down the Waimakariri Gorge, and it was terrifying. I just got really angry with it. Come on, and just paddled non-stop for 5.5 hours and managed to get through it. But it was really like fast flowing rivers with debris and all sorts in them, scary places to be.
God, wow, that's a pretty spectacular story of failure and fear leading to success. I'm not sure we'll top that, no matter how many episodes we do of the Build Your Purpose podcast. That's pretty spectacular. And then finally, we ask all of our guests to write a postcard to their 20-year-old self, imparting a piece of wisdom you've learned on your journey to build a collection of purpose-driven advice for us all to learn from. And if you're willing to share the sort of 4 to 5 lines that you'd like to say to 20-year-old Holly.
Oh, wow, there's a good one. Okay, I'm going to go with think big, dream bigger, and go climb your Everest, whatever that is. Obviously, at the time, I hadn't climbed Everest at 21. I'm going to go with smile through the pain. That's a really good sort of piece of advice. It works. Try it if you haven't tried that before. Like, a positive mindset is a resilient mindset. And I think win or learn. I think no path is linear, no path to achievement. So I think it's about embracing the detours, and quite often that's where the gold lies. So but think big, dream bigger, set big, audacious goals. That's what I would say all day long.
That's brilliant. Win or learn. Oh, that's brilliant. I've never heard that before. Win or learn is a great one. I'll definitely be taking that into my.
I didn't come up with it, but it's a good one.
Very modest. I was going to attribute it to you, but very, very modest. And then finally, Holly, where can we find out more about you, How Many Elephants, and World Female Ranger Week?
Yeah, so howmanyelephants.org, and at How Many Elephants on Insta, Facebook, at World Female Ranger Week and worldfemalerangerweek.org. And my most recent venture, which I'm very excited about, which I mentioned briefly earlier, is wildlife positive travel. I'm taking small groups, 6 people, to the front line to patrol with rangers with me. And that's all about, connecting donors with on the ground conservation, seeing firsthand the impact that your money can make. So they're really special trips, really few places on them. So all the information about them is wildlifepositivetravel.com.
Brilliant. I think I can think of a number of people, including myself, that is definitely going to be having a look at those trips, because that sounds absolutely fantastic. And all that's left for me to say now is, Holly, thank you so much for joining me on the Build Your Purpose podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and learn so much about your journey, and I'm feeling incredibly motivated and inspired to get cracking with the next goal.
Thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, and thanks for setting up this platform.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Holly. Take care.
Bye-bye.